Welcome, episode 2 of Celtics Talks Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Parrington Turner. And we're here with episode 2 on Facebook, Instagram. Check us out, Celtics Talk Radio, S3LTICS Talk Radio. And today we have a special episode, special guest. We got Celtics, Sports Illustrated Celtics own writer, Bobby Krivitsky. He's with us today. He's joined us today. Bobby, how you doing?
Kevin, I'm doing great. Excited to be a part of the revamped show. We've talked before on one of the older formats where I was doing guest segments over the phone. So excited to do this and looking forward to the new format of the show.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. It's going to be a good one. This past week has been it's been some wild games with the C's. So I'm
for sure.
very interested to see what you thought. I think we're going to start off. I know we're going to get to the finals, but I want to start off with, the past two games with the Pacers and the 76ers. What have you seen that you liked and what you did not like?
So the biggest one is obviously against the stiffer competition and what just happened Saturday against Philadelphia. And it was something that Joe Mazzulla touched on in the locker room afterwards. And that is being able to figure it out against a really good opponent in a hostile environment when things are not going well. I wrote for SI.com that the first half in particular, in terms of physicality and the slower pace, resembled a playoff game, and specifically the Eastern Conference Finals and how that looked against the Heat. And the Celtics in the first 24 minutes had 8 turnovers, and it didn't really punish them in terms of points on the board for the Sixers, but it did take away from finding any sort of offensive rhythm. And no one really had it going. They had 50 points at halftime. And then in the second half, they came out and they had a couple turnovers, including a Marcus Smart charge. It led to a James Harden 3. But after that point in the game, only 3 giveaways. And as they started to really lock in defensively, which is always, it needs to be the backbone for this team because it travels more and it's less fickle than shooting variance. And so for them, once they locked in and got stops, Kevin, I know I'm long-winded here, but once they did that and really stiffened up defensively, that led to being able to play faster and led to better opportunities offensively. Tatum got his rhythm going at the end of the third, and obviously that was relevant at the end of the game.
Yes, and that brings me to my next question. So they won these games, but I don't think a lot of Celtics fans are leaving too excited or happy about how it ended. For you, are you more concerned or are you more hopeful with the wins they were able to pull out, despite it being overtime or despite it being last second shots? Are you more happy or are you more concerned?
If I had to put more stock in one, it would be towards the happy and the encouraging. Let's not forget they won the games, but at the same time, there is more to the story than just, hey, they came out and they got victories here out of the All-Star break to hold on to that top seed. There's also the relevance of they shouldn't have had to go to overtime against Indiana. And Philadelphia in the fourth quarter was lifeless and the building was quiet. And all of a sudden, the Celtics, there was a Jaylen Brown turnover on a sloppy pass, and Malcolm Brogdon missed a bunny off a baseline cut. And that opened the door for a quick Sixers run. And all of a sudden, they're back in the game, and the crowd comes to life. And now you have to deal with that. And it takes a difficult shot on 2 seconds left on the clock, but let's just call it an end of game play. And the luck that Joel Embiid didn't get his heave off in time in order to pull out a victory, that they were in a position to win more comfortably than they did. So there's certainly positives, but there are also negatives that you can't just gloss over.
What do you think of Jason Tatum against physical teams? When we look in last year in the finals with the Warriors, Draymond Green, they was helping out anytime he drove to the basket, forced him to shoot a lot of threes. And then, Milwaukee's kind of same thing with Giannis in the paint. And then with Philly, you have the best center in the league, which had Jason Tatum forced to shoot outside shots, and sometimes they fall, sometimes they don't. What can you say about him against physical teams? Or is that something that concerns you, or you think he'll figure it out as the season goes on?
There are certainly, when you see him struggle, it tends to be against that type of a defense.
Yeah.
And we know that's when the playoffs, the physicality ratchets up. At the same time, I think there are 2 areas in particular that you can trust to help him. And you can say you'd like to see more of it right now, and I'd agree with that, but I still have confidence in them helping Tatum and helping the Celtics come the playoffs. One is his improved abilities as a screener. He's made a significant impact, whether it produces points for him. And against Indiana, the starting lineup overall, I'd give them a negative grade because of how poorly the third quarter looked. But offensively, they were also pretty good. And one of the ways they got going was they started diversifying their attack. And Tatum screening was a part of that, as well as getting him the ball down low. So his abilities as a screener, whether it produces opportunities for him at the rim or someone else, tends to get buckets for Boston. And the other one is you really need to make sure, especially against the physical defense, that you're setting quality screens. Robert Williams, Al Horford, if they want to run actions with Jaylen Brown, they don't do it a ton, but sometimes they do, and it tends to work for them in a small sample size. So those two things in particular, good hard screens to get him an opening and a little bit of a runway, and then his abilities setting the pick and rolling afterwards.
That's a great point, and that brings me to the finals. Like, yeah, they're the top of the East, top of the league, top dogs, and they got a chance to go back to the finals. But personally, I'm getting a little sense of worry of maybe they might get too trigger happy on the open shots, and if they're not physical enough. And Al Horford's playing great, but he's also a veteran, and Robert Williams, young guy, but coming off an injury. There's a little they have depth, but they have a little holes and chinks in their armor a little bit. To you, what is going to be the key thing for them to get back to the finals?
Certainly, at the top of the priority list right now is, I would say, number one, utilizing their depth. I think they are the deepest team in the NBA. And so being able to manage minutes down the stretch so everyone's as fresh as possible for the playoffs. Jaylen Brown out tonight against the Knicks due to personal reasons. Well, this is a really tough week in which they have 4 games and it's every other night. And so being able to just not put too much on anyone's plate. They've talked openly about managing Tatum's minutes and shaving some of those off. Not really an opportunity to do that when you go to overtime against Indiana and then have an intense one against the Sixers 2 nights later. So we'll see what happens on that front as they figure out rotations, which is the other component to this. Because now all of a sudden, for the first time, everyone's available, including the guy they got at the trade deadline, Mike Muscala. So that, you saw more Sam Hauser against Indiana, more Grant Williams against the Sixers. And we'll see how everyone starts to get comfortable as Joe Mazzulla figures out the roles with everyone at his disposal.
Yeah, and also Joe Mazzulla, right? He was named the permanent Celtics head coach. We'll start with this. How do you like that decision?
I think it was a good one. They didn't want to get to the playoffs and have meaningful games where he also has that in his head that he's coaching with his job on the line. It creates a sense of clarity and structure where the players understand that Joe is going to be there beyond this season. And that was always the intention when they promoted him. It was a staff filled with assistants who mostly came with Ime Udoka. Joe Mazzulla, youngest active head coach at 34. I think, not to say that it's been perfect, but it was never going to be. He's done well. He has the respect of the locker room and strong relationships in there, including with the best players on the team. And so as soon as they were able to sort everything out legally, then they felt comfortable making this decision. And I think it was a good time to do it.
That I want to know what you think of my take, right? So, with the Joe Mazzulla pickup being permanent coach, what I've seen lately this season is the Celtics have been great. They've been good, but they seem a little less disciplined on defense. And I know it's easy to say that after this past week, but I've also just seen it throughout this season where some guys like Jason Tatum, I've seen him do a turnover and he kind of jogs back on defense. Obviously, with Marcus Smart in and out the lineups, it changes a lot of things. And they have some older guys, but they seem a little less disciplined than when they had Ime Udoka as coach. And maybe that plays into Joe Mazzulla being the youngest the youngest head coach. But what do you think about how they've been compared to Ime Udoka or Joe Mazzulla, or you haven't seen anything at all?
So they're seventh in terms of points allowed per game. I
Mhm.
believe they're fourth in defensive rating. So I think overall, pretty good at that end of the floor. Are there lapses? Absolutely. Did we just see it in 2 straight games? For sure. I think turnovers also bleed into defensive struggles.
Yeah.
And there is an element of sometimes, in particular, Jason Tatum, he doesn't like the lack of a whistle and he's slow getting back. We've seen that throughout this season, really throughout his career. I think he's cut down on that, but it still exists. I also don't think that's unique to him. There's plenty of players, especially stars, who do that when they don't get a call or it doesn't go their way. So you'd like to see it not exist, but it is what it is. It's just a reality that's baked into it. And as far as, Missoula versus Ime, it makes sense that they'd be better defensively under Udoka because he is a defensive oriented coach. That was his strength in particular and his background. Missoula is more offensive oriented. So I think you've seen a boost there and the Celtics playing with a faster pace. I still think they're a pretty balanced group and have what it takes on both ends of the floor to win a championship. And it's why you see them with the best record in the NBA.
Do you consider this a team that lives and die by the three?
By and large, yeah, absolutely. And,
Okay.
there's nights where we talk to Joe after a game and after a loss in particular, and he says, we should have shot more threes. And we look at the percentages and they shot a ton of them and they weren't going in, but he believes in the math. Can't knock him for that. And, I think there are nights where it bears out and there are nights where you'd like to see them diversify the offense more. I do think in these last two games, though, they've done a pretty good job of that. They had 28 points in the paint in that second half rally. And so that really helped them a lot against Indiana. Like I said, their best offense came inside the arc. So as long as they're mixing it up and especially getting stops to play up tempo, create transition opportunities, which is where a lot of those points at the paint and the free throw line get manufactured, then I think they're in pretty good shape.
As far as now, things can change as we get deeper into the season towards the end. But who do you not want the Celtics to face in the playoffs? First round. Who do you want them to avoid?
It's a great question. I don't operate that way. To win a championship, you're going to have to go through great teams. And so certainly there's hey, we want this road to be as light as possible. But by the second round, it's going to get tough. And I think the East is deep enough in terms of quality competition that it's going to be that way from the jump. I mean, they could end up, Brooklyn has certainly, they're fifth right now. So they had enough of a cushion. And with their defense, maybe they avoid the play-in tournament. But you're looking at possibly playing Miami or Toronto in the first round. And we know the Celtics struggles against the Heat and how that matchup presents challenges. Not to mention, we talked about Joe Mazzulla. Eric Spoelstra is arguably the best coach in the NBA. So that chess match there and how Mazzulla is able to hold up his end of the bargain, we shall see if it comes to fruition. And then Nick Nurse with that Raptors defense, plus the addition of Pirtle. I mean, that's just, it's not that you think the Celtics will lose, but it's an exhausting first round. I think they're most likely in for a tough test from the get-go. And then we'll see what happens as they get into the stiffer competition in the second round. And ultimately, as long as everyone stays healthy, I fully expect an Eastern Conference Finals between the Celtics and the Bucks.
Celtics and the Bucks. Do you have a prediction already, or no? You don't want to say it yet.
I don't have a prediction other than I think it goes 7. I think it'll be a bloodbath if it happens. And we're going to see, because Giannis has not really asserted himself in either of the regular season matchups yet, as far as just going through that wall and being a battering ram and plowing his way to the rim like we know he usually does, especially come playoffs. So I think we're going to see a more physical, more assertive Giannis come the playoffs. And it's going to be interesting to see how Boston responds to that, how Milwaukee with Crowder and their new additions look, and if Chris Middleton starts to give them more, because these two teams are pretty even. And so I think the Celtics have less to figure out, but the Bucks might make more improvements between now and the playoffs.
I'm getting the time constraint that we have 1 more minute left with you. So I only have one more question. Who's the dark horse on this Celtics roster that you think is going to be key to their success? I mean, besides Jason Tatum, besides Jaylen Brown, someone off the bench or someone that people don't know, who do you think is going to be the dark horse and very vital to their success?
I don't think there's a dark horse. I mean, I guess the more fitting answer in the spirit of the question would be Sam Hauser with his shot making, because I mean, it's just such a huge difference maker when that's happening, and to give this offense even more firepower. But as far as the answers that I more think on a consistent basis, I would point to guys that everyone knows. Grant Williams, especially with his defense, whether it's against Embiid, should they match up, whether it's Giannis, whoever, not to mention his three-point shooting. And then also Malcolm Brogdon and Derek White. Derek White, you could argue, has been their second most impactful player this season. He's playing all NBA caliber defense. I think he looks better orchestrating the offense, not just being a connector and playing off it and making things happen. He's shooting the ball really well. And then with Brogdon, he's their sixth man, and he's been such a difference maker for this team and leveling up. So I think it's more those three: Brogdon, Derek White, Grant Williams, who everyone knows and can point to what they've done this season, but they're just such important difference makers come the playoffs.
Well, I appreciate you so much, Bobby Kravitsky. That's all the time we have with you. Thank you so much for answering my questions and responding to my takes. I appreciate you, man. Hopefully we can get you on the show again.
Really enjoyed it, Kevin. Happy to come back anytime.
No problem. Celtics writers from Sports Illustrated, Bobby Kravitsky. Thank you.
Bring that smoke!